proper cross at the ankle look. My phone will go right here. So, it says on. And I was like, so how should we control that? I don't want to make that noise. Yeah.
Marcus. Jill. I've been waiting to call you that.
You want to do a mic check? Is your mic?
Hello? What about tech-wise as like when I'm done talking? Like, leave it on? Okay. No sneezing.
Started. Okay. Just
It's supposed to be like they click on the link and then
Good morning, everyone. We will be kicking off the program shortly, so I'm looking at you, Patrick. We're good to go? Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here for the event, From Promise to Progress, How Communities Are Shaping Infrastructure Equity. I'm Jennifer Wells, the Director of Economic Justice with Community Change. And I want to just name that when we first mention or start speaking on infrastructure as a topic, it can get a bit nebulous. So I'd like to bring it home a little bit for us in this beginning. And with climate change, failed infrastructure, and a lack of economic support for my community, New Orleans and the Gulf Coast, I was permanently, myself and my immediate family, were permanently displaced when Hurricane Katrina hit. I am a third-generation New Orleanian, so a born and bred city girl who found herself living in West Virginia. During my time in West Virginia, I can say that what became evidently clear was that the mostly white and rural community was facing very similar challenges and barriers that the mostly Black urban community that I grew up in. And let me also name, while we understand that Black and Brown and Indigenous communities are hit first and worst, one thing that I understood that connected us, unfortunately, was disinvestment, decades of disinvestment. But what can connect us now is something quite different, and that is thanks to the Biden administration's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS Act. We are looking at trillions of dollars that are finally being invested in our communities. We are looking at being able to rebuild infrastructure to readily address climate change, to provide good jobs for our community members, to rebuild local economies, and to finally reinvest in a path forward in a future for our families. And what I'm so excited for today is that we have incredible grassroots organizers and leaders who are working right now to make certain that these policies meet the administration's promise of equity. we have to understand our communities must be centered in the implementation of these policies. Organizing matters, right? And our federal, state, and city governments must build relationships with community organizers who know best what communities need and how those needs need to be addressed. So those relationships need to be solidified. I'm also excited to introduce our facilitator, Marcus Baram, reporter and editor with Capital in Maine, excuse me for that, with Capital in Maine, an award-winning publication investigating power in politics. Marcus is going to lead us in a conversation with amazing grassroots leaders on this stage as we discuss how these relationships can be built, right? Let me see. I don't want to, okay, we're good. And I also want to acknowledge that we have leaders, amazing leaders on here in the room and that are joining us virtually that will also be invited into this conversation later. And with that, and without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Marcus.
Thanks. Hi. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me, really. And thank you for the introduction, Jennifer. As again, my name is Marcus Baram. I'm editor at Capital in Maine, as Jennifer said, and I mean, part of my interest and maybe why it's relevant for me to be here is that I edited a special project called Reinvesting in America, which has assigned stories, but probably about 2 stories a month, looking at the impact of all these massive projects. So obviously, we always read about the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act. And it's all very from, top down. It's all like, this is how many billions or trillions are going out the door. This is what's going to happen in how many different states and how many workers will be affected. But then that's the end of it. You don't see any more coverage. Like if you even Google some of these programs and look for specifics, you find a lot of, vague terms and vague proposals. And so this project is focused on really getting specifics about the local impact. What's happening with that factory in West Virginia that's training old coal miners to now, work at a lithium-ion battery factory? And how is that proceeding? And talking to workers and people affected in the community. So that has been sort of the focus for me for the last 8 months. But to this panel, though, I wanted to ask, each of the panelists to introduce themselves and then to talk about how community organizing helped to launch these projects and to succeed at getting the federal funding that they got. So, Patrick, let's start with you.
My name is Patrick Iwaki. Again, I'm the co-CEO of Red Medicine LLC. We offer professional civic engagement services, in this case specifically to the Blackfeet tribe, where I was a lobbyist during the 2023 state legislative session. What we did was use organizing to bring awareness to this funding that is coming into the state, roughly $700 million, that we want, and we are trying to make it understood that the governor, the state of Montana, has an obligation to the tribes in ensuring that broadband development happens in their communities. I'll get into the sticky situation, but we kind of laid the framework or the groundwork, the paperwork or paper trail to say that we tried to codify this language at the state level, and we're fought against these attempts. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lauren Akiem, and I'm the Climate Co-Director for the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy. This is our 30th anniversary, and we're an environmental justice, economic, and racial justice advocacy organization where we're really working together with our union and community partners to shift power for building better conditions for workers and communities and the environment, and doing that we need to work together in a big tent way to confront the racist and sexist legacies of capitalism and the way that capitalism extracts from workers and communities and the environment and tries to pit us against each other. And by coming together, we can confront that in order to build the investments that we need for a safer future and for safer conditions for all of us. And so I'm really honored and humbled to be able to work with a lot of grassroots leaders in doing that. I think of myself more as a policy nerd And so I'm really humbled to be working in community with a lot of grassroots and worker leaders to do that. And we're really excited in the federal funding to work together with groups like the Teachers Union and the Building Trades in LA, along with our community and environmental justice partners, to try to win funding for projects that will bring more renewable energy to Los Angeles, hopefully such as at our public schools and other public institutions, and in ways that can bring more solar energy to our renters, that can upgrade our buildings to be more efficient and to bring more water resilience to our region through projects like stormwater capture projects at schools and at local parks that also bring green space to communities that are struggling with a lot of extreme heat and extreme weather impacts in Los Angeles. And so we're hoping to be able to work with our partners and institutions to bring down some of these funds and to do it in ways that invest in really transformatively good jobs for our residents.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Sadiki, and I'm a community organizer in DC with the Washington Interfaith Network. We are a broad-based, multi-faith, multiracial organization, and community organizing really allowed us to get ahead of the IRA federal dollars by creating pilot projects in predominantly Black and brown low-income neighborhoods here in DC that can serve as a model for what the district can do at a larger scale once those Inflation Reduction Act dollars are actually moving and hitting the district's bank accounts. So we were able to do that through building a base of what we call citizen scientists. We trained leaders in detecting nitrogen dioxide in their own homes and making, methane gas, which isn't one of the gases you see, some outdoor pollution. When you think of it, you think of these great gray billowing clouds, and methane isn't like that. So by having these detectors, we were able to see this number is actually higher than the numbers that the EPA says that, when it's wildfire season, you have to wear a mask outside. These numbers inside your kitchen are higher than that. But we aren't talking about those numbers because the gas industry doesn't want you to think about that. So we were able to create 2 pilot projects for electrification in 2 DC neighborhoods, and we're also working to pass legislation that would expand that to 30,000 homes in DC that would be able to access free retrofits for gas to electric conversions for heating, cooling, water boilers, and also increase their insulation, get more weatherization opportunities. And once we pass that, since we were able to combine the local DC budget with Inflation Reduction Act dollars, we can get started on that this year. So we'll already have programs that are moving by the time we're ready to implement the Inflation Reduction Act. So because when we were doing the testing, it became really evident, there's high numbers of nitrogen dioxide and methane gas in people's homes now. We can't wait for the Inflation Reduction Act. We need to start acting immediately. And then once the Inflation Reduction Act happens, great, we can expand really quickly.
And then just to follow up a little bit, I'd love to get a little more detail, maybe just for a minute or two from each of you, about kind of what it took to get the attention from, obviously these are massive federal programs. They get, thousands of applicants, and what it took from you to get their attention and to, show that you were kind of worthy or deserving or, long overdue for projects. So you can start, Sidra.
Yeah, so we organized a lot of meetings with different agencies and made sure that the folks who were on the ground doing the stove leak detection work and the outdoor leak detection work, that those residents were at the forefront of those conversations. In one situation when we were actually pushing the council member who introduced that Healthy Homes Act, Act, Charles Allen. We were pushing him to introduce it. And, he wanted to, but things were moving a little slowly. So we invited him out to one of the public housing properties in D.C. that we have a strong relationship with. And we did that gas stove testing with him in that property, and then took him outside where residents shared testimonies about what they were experiencing in their own building, how during the winters, DCHA, the DC Housing Authority, doesn't let them have control over the temperature in their homes. So they actually end up really blasting their air conditioning units that are in their windows because the heating is so high that they're boiling hot in the winters, which ends up increasing chances of having mold in those properties, and also is just a waste of DCHA's dollars if they're spending all of this money on heating their homes when people are opening their windows because it's way too hot. So he was able to hear those stories and also see the mold, see the roaches, see the conditions folks were living in, and that pushed him to introduce that bill at the timeline that we wanted, rather than the timeline that he had in mind previously.
Interesting. I mean, Lauren, can you touch on that too? I'd be curious to know what, just in LA or surrounding, communities, how that kind of helped get the attention of funding. The funds.
Yeah, I think one example that comes to mind is from an earlier round of federal funding. We're working together with groups like Scope, who's also in the room today, and with partners across the state like Clean Water Action and Community Water Center. We were able to help win really significant resources in the state budget that was through federal funding that had then been allocated to the state budget for utility debt relief for both water and energy debt that people were carrying, upwards of, I think, between $2 and $3 billion when it was all said and done for people to have their utility debts relieved. And that was through a lot of really deep organizing that groups like Scope were doing, that groups like also groups throughout California had been doing for a long time, and recognizing that the human right to water and the human right to have energy to take care of your family, and being able to bring attention to that, and in concert with our utilities, who it also needed to have some funding assistance to be operating, given the number of people who were struggling with their bills during the pandemic and even before and after the pandemic. And so by working together with that and in recognizing that need and bringing attention to that, we were able to, I think, successfully win those funds. But we know that moving forward, that was one temporary solution, and now we need a lot of federal assistance to upgrade our infrastructure in our utilities to have clean energy and clean water in ways that are not overly burdensome to those same vulnerable ratepayers that may have gotten some assistance through those temporary measures, because in California we have a lot of really regressive tax laws that make it really difficult to have any kind of assistance for people who are struggling with their utility bills if they have municipal utilities. And so in order to have the clean energy, clean water future we need in a way that is not overly impacting our communities, we're really looking to the federal dollars and hoping to bring attention to those needs to be able to upgrade that infrastructure while creating good jobs and in a way that is not unduly burdening people.
So in terms of the tribal community and the IIJ funding that is coming to the states, we really wanted to use our efforts to expose the broken system that exists as it is today. There's a real lack of accountability when this funding comes to tribal communities and those internet service providers, rural internet service providers who cater or serve their communities. There's currently funding under the Connect America Fund that supports internet service providers that are already established in these communities. And this is up towards tens of millions of dollars every year. And this funding is not accountable, and there's no development or no maintenance of these systems that occurs. And so when this funding is reaching the governor's office, who will be allocating this broadband funding to the state of Montana, there's already been, especially under the ARPA funding, where the rules that are in place kind of play a situation where money doesn't necessarily get to the tribe and is being funneled to outside corporations who are coming into the state trying to develop internet in the state. And, we see that as very highly problematic, especially when, in the unique situation that Montana has with the Blackfeet tribe owning their own internet service provider, where there's these outside corporations that are coming in and getting awarded these grants where they should be rightfully going to the tribe if they own that internet service provider. And so our efforts have not been successful in terms of ensuring that this funding is getting to our tribal communities. But we really wanted to expose that, these players, definitely the governor's office and those individuals who are, in responsibility of ensuring that there's engagement and consultations with tribes are failing to do so. And so there's rules that are written at the federal level, but these are just rules. There's no teeth in it. And so what we're really asking for is some policy change at the federal level that gives teeth to this policy and ensures that tribes are getting this money and have an equal shake at this.
Words are even more forceful at the end there with the microphone. So, no, thank you. I wanted to, obviously, each of you has faced challenges with these initiatives and then succeeded, and obviously face further challenges. And I'd love to hear about what advice you'd offer other community organizers and community groups who want to, bring about equity when it comes to hiring, impact, and decision making for each of these initiatives. So Lauren, we start with you.
Yeah, so at Lane we have a long history of success with policies like projects labor agreements, community workforce agreements, target and local hire when it comes to the construction of projects, and with apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs and supporting those. We don't run them, but we're really excited about the programs that our partners run to help connect people into those jobs when it comes to union construction, and the ways that those can really be transformatively good careers for people, and particularly for in LA, we've seen increasingly those jobs be able to connect with communities of color, with women increasingly coming into the trades, and that it's a real opportunity for people who have come out of coming home from the criminal justice system, coming out of poverty and homelessness, and to now have really incredible, sometimes six-figure jobs where they're not carrying any student debt. So we've seen a lot of track record of success with those policies at our local agencies, and so are really excited to see a lot of that language in the federal funding or support for policies like that, as well as the Justice 40 commitment, which is something we've also fought for in programs locally, like the LA County's stormwater capture project funding, where there's a commitment similar to Justice 40 that 40% of the resources of that program need to go into what is unfortunately termed disadvantaged communities, but we take to mean communities who have long been disinvested in and have dealt with a lot of environmental injustice. So we're really excited to see those policies in some of the federal funding, and really look to being able to ensure that as much as possible those policies are enshrined in our agencies permanently, and not only at the chance of this one-time funding, but that they're to the greatest extent made permanent for both those worker standards and for commitments to invest in our communities that we've long disinvested in. And we are also, I've been really inspired hearing from the groups who are in this room today and who have been in the conversations that Community Change has convened, in terms of from folks who have been doing community organizing over the last decades, like WIN DC and Isaiah and AIM, to groups like C4 Evergreen, who are newly organizing in Utah, and groups like Stand Up Nashville, who are really thoughtfully trying to confront the difficulties in having some of the labor policies that in California are a little easier for us. And so it's been really inspiring to hear how a lot of the groups here who are really rooted in their communities and in strong and consistent and dedicated organizing have been working to confront all of these things that are a little bit different in each of our different geographies, but are, or maybe a lot different, but we know that the solution is the same in terms of working together and deeply rooted in community organizing to confront those things.
I mean, can you touch on, and then we'll go to Cedra, like just any cautionary tales that applicants for some of these programs should know before they jump in and as they start to work with federal agencies, especially in federal programs?
Can you repeat that?
Just in terms of like any cautionary tales for other communities who are, obviously pursuing some of these federal, funds, and especially in terms of the equity, issue.
So these funding streams, they have funds that are allocated towards tribes, and that is reflective of the tribal treaties that the federal government has with tribes, and that's a certain relation. That's an important relationship that I think other communities in the country can build upon. Whenever there's federal requirements for the federal government to ensure that development happens in these communities, and definitely in the state of Montana, where tribal communities are the largest minority group in the state, that's a really good opportunity to utilize your advocacy in ensuring that your voice is heard. And so, in our communities, we have to be the loudest person in the room. And definitely, whenever historically, this type of funding is being utilized by rural telecom companies, and that we're entering into this industry as in competition, that we have to be able to have all of our ducks in a row to be able to say that we have the qualifications to do this development. And I think, with our education, the further education that we have as tribes and entering these industries, we show that, we are successful and that we can develop and operate systems that other communities are looking at as success too, and how they can incorporate into their communities. So there's a lot of opportunities in this funding. We just have to ensure that it reaches our communities.
Yeah. I think sometimes it's really easy to slip into being really policy focused and not power focused. So when we had our working groups of, community leaders, resident leaders who had been doing the gas leak detection work in their own neighborhoods. And I think at the beginning of the work, some of those folks began saying stuff like, okay, well, there's all these gas leaks in my neighborhood. We need to replace all the gas pipes. And that, yes, there's a lot of gas leaks in the neighborhood. And if we replace all of those pipes, then we're onto the gas infrastructure for another 70 plus years. So we began to realize we can't just do the citizen science work alone. We have to combine it with political education, and make sure that people are really understanding power. So once people began to see the work as a campaign around not just one issue like gas leaks or gas stoves, and it became around utilities and equity and how utilities make profit off of people. And after, residents were walking in a neighborhood and had a gas leak that was at the maximum that our methane gas detector could even detect, called Washington Gas and then heard their response when they said that number. And Washington Gas said, oh, don't worry, that's only halfway to explosive. That radicalized that person in that moment. And they became hungry to find out how Washington Gas makes their money, how Washington Gas makes their decisions, how they influence the mayor or different council members. And then, they were then those same people who were we need to replace every single gas pipe. Since we expanded the campaign, it became, we need to electrify gas homes that are running off of gas, so we don't even need to rely on these pipes anymore. So I guess the cautionary tale there is like, if we're focusing on one issue rather than campaigns as a whole, then we can start going down paths that don't lead us to transformative systems around how we see our utilities. And then I think the one other piece of advice that I would offer is around coalition building, because it's been really, really useful for us to be in constant conversation, not just with our folks in DC, but Washington Gas covers more than DC. So when we're in conversation with our sister organizations in Maryland, like Action in Montgomery, we're able to share stories and tactics of what we're seeing from the Washington Gas lobbyists. We had 86 people signed up to testify at a hearing, and Washington Gas was signed up to testify as well. But once they saw our 86 folks standing there, all in the same, colored shirt and everything, then they bailed, and Washington Gas did not testify that day. But what they did do was send a letter that was not publicly published, and they sent it to every single council member in DC. But because we had built allies with council, the council members sent us that letter, and they were like, hey, just so you know, Washington Gas is opposing your messaging by saying this, this, and this. And that's such an incredible, and we were able to, send our own letter and have our own conversations with council members. But then we were also able to share that with our team in Maryland and say, hey, when we're going to hearings, this is how Washington Gas is reacting. You guys should be prepared for the same. So coalition building within and outside of DC has been really, really useful.
That's great. That's a great story. We've all, I think, we're very familiar with how a lot of federal programs aren't that equitable. And going back, you see obviously programs that were started, whether in the 70s and 80s, and how they have progressed. And these Biden administration policies, obviously whether the Infrastructure Act or IRA or the CHIPS Act, they all incorporate, or not all, but they incorporate to some extent some, equitable features. But what more could be done? And I've talked about this, Lauren, with Madeline at Lane, so now she's very well familiar with it, as you are. So maybe you can touch on some of that too. Like, what more could they do in how they promote and obviously craft these initiatives?
So there's a whole list of things that the federal government could be doing, but in terms of tribal communities, what we're really asking for is that when these outside internet service providers come into our communities, that they have engagement and consultation with the tribes. Right now, there's rules that are written, like I said, that just have no teeth. And so we want the rules that are in place, to be policy, to be required for whenever development is happening on our reservations. Our effort at the state level was to try to pass legislation that required tribal resolution to be attached to any application for internet development within a tribal reservation borders. And similar to, sorry, I forgot your name, but similar to your story, we were met with that same combativeness by the Montana Rural Internet Service Association. And so, this is a reality that we face, that, they just want to keep tribes in the dark, not understanding this funding coming in and how much of a role that they actually have in this process as a stakeholder. Also, that tribes have the right to first refusal for any of these projects within their reservation borders. Historically, whenever these internet service providers create their drafts for plan, that they there's a kind of like a conundrum in Indian country where we have it stems from federal Indian policy, specifically the Dawes Act, where there's tribal trust lands or federal lands on the reservation, but within that, it's checkerboarded state fee land. And so these internet service providers will come in, they'll develop within their jurisdictions or their right-of-ways, but once it reaches tribal lands, they'll just cut off development altogether. And this is a reality also in other parts of rural Montana. There's legislation passed that gives more authority to counties to have oversight for funding coming into their jurisdictions. And so we just kind of want that same opportunity to be able to say, yes, we understand that this development is coming into our area. We've been part of that process, part of that conversation, and either they can support it or they can refuse it. Again, there's funding under the Connect America Fund, tens of millions of dollars every year that these internet service providers are getting. We want some more accountability in that process. If there's no accountability in that, we can bet that there's not going to be any accountability in this funding rollout as well. There has not been. Really? No. Yeah. And they can receive this funding, and it's made for development, but also maintenance. And they'll tell a tribal government, you're getting internet in a year or 2 years, and then they kick it down the road. And so we want to say, yeah, we're getting that services. They are supporting us. And then also there's funding that is, with the development of these systems that are going to support the participants or the customers in those services. Most of these are low income, and that's what these programs help, is low income households be able to access internet. And these internet service providers are failing to educate their communities about these programs, their existence of these programs. And so we want to be able to, we want the federal government to acknowledge that, and then offer the opportunity for other organizations to be able to receive funding so that they can educate the community about these programs, and not put it on the shoulders of these ISPs who are failing to do so. So yeah, there's a lot of policies, and we can go on.
Yeah, for sure. All right, thanks. Yeah, Lauren.
Yeah, I think you mentioned Madeline. So Jobs to Move America, her organization, has been doing a lot to advance the promise of Buy America, Build America, and to make sure that that's realized throughout the country with things like battery manufacturing and EV vehicle, electric vehicle manufacturing, as well as around making it easier for great policies like local and targeted hire to be able to be put in place. And I think another thing is that federal funding can often be really difficult to access, and that's something that we've heard a lot in the last day or so, and that we've experienced a lot in Los Angeles, even a city as, you think of LA as being, it's the second largest city. You'd think that it would be able to readily navigate a lot of these things, but even then, I think technical assistance and capacity to just navigate the variety of funds available is really important. And so I'm interested and excited to see the Thriving Communities technical assistance program and how that might be able to help a lot of different areas and groups access more easily the federal funding. And I'm really excited for the policies and sort of standards that folks like Julie Sue are enshrining at the Department of Labor. And so just want to really echo the importance of those kind of regulatory frameworks to be able to enshrine a lot of the standards that we would hope to see. And just one last thing that I would add is the importance for these funding streams to be thoughtful in how projects are connecting promise or a rhetoric around workforce development to actually placing people into real jobs at the end of that, and not just kind of leaving people stranded with a certification, but actually making sure that a workforce development program leads people into good, preferably union jobs.
Actual jobs.
Yeah, actual jobs, right, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely echo that piece on jobs. We had a recent meeting with the DC Sustainable Energy Utility, which they hire a lot of the contractors doing the electrification work. And when we asked them around if they're hiring people who have been previously incarcerated, how easy it is for folks in that situation to get a job. They were like, oh, well, we leave that up to the contractors. We actually aren't sure which of our contractors hire people who have been previously incarcerated and which don't. And we really need to ensure, like you said, that there's training opportunities and the earn while you learn is in place so folks can access these jobs. But to the question of like recommendations for state, in DC, our state is our local, but my recommendations at the state level would be increasing coordination between agencies. We had a meeting with the Deputy Mayor's Office for Economic Planning and Development, and the meeting was around DC's over 3,000 vacant homes, and we had a vision of a lot of those homes aren't in livable condition. We had a vision of electrifying and rehabbing those homes and then being able to sell them at lower rates to first-time generational Washingtonians who have lived, were born in the district, want to stay in the district. When we brought that idea up and we were, tossing out, there's all this Inflation Reduction Act money coming in, like, look at this opportunity. One of their responses was, like, that sounds really interesting, but, the Department of Energy and Environment, they aren't in our clusters right now, so we haven't been having those conversations. And we were just like, what does that mean? Like, you just aren't talking to each other? So I think there's a real big need to, between agencies, whether it's economic and planning and development or our public housing authorities, making sure that they're in conversation and know what the possibilities are, because they aren't going to act otherwise.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it feels like one of those things where you have to just be very resourceful and persistent again. And that's the only way to really to get what you want. So, well, that's great. Unfortunately, we have time limitations, but any questions from the audience for our great panelists? Yeah. Oh, here.
Yeah, this can be a quick question. I organize in Montana like Patrick, and I think one dynamic that we are experiencing or have experienced in navigating organizing around some of this funding is just the way it lands in a rural and particularly red community. The dollars are very politicized, and there's a dynamic to be navigated there in terms of our communities and specifically our governments or elected officials' willingness to take the money, especially if it's sort of named and claimed. And I would just love to hear anyone speak to that, maybe in particular Patrick or others who have experience with that.
I mean, it's unfortunate to the the family or the household not being able to see their community receive this funding, just based on where the current leadership is, federally on political spectrum, and living in Montana, it's a heavily red state, and it comes down to the constituency and trying to educate them about their leadership and the opportunities this funding will bring to their community, and because of their neglect to make the right choices of going after this funding is falling on them. And Montana was a deeply red state due to a midterm, a lack of educating the people of Montana that there's an election going on, that it's you should participate, and that's where we're at right now. Is there's an election cycle coming up here, and we got to get our communities educated on this lack of funding coming into the state due to their decision makers, and how can we replace those decision makers for people who want to bring this funding in?
I think there's one more question. Oh, I think we're at the point now that we have to wrap for this conversation. For folks that are in the room, I think there's our opportunity for us to answer those questions a little later on. But I just want to thank the panel today and to Marcus for facilitating a conversation and just naming that. I think it resonated from this panel that there's oftentimes that policy does not feel connected to people, and that this is our opportunity to make certain that our neighborhoods are feeling it, our people are employed by it and earning good wages, right? And this is a chance for us to really navigate the progress in our own local economies and at the federal level as well. And I just wanted to also say how exciting it is for community change. I speak a little bit for community change as I sit up on this panel, and how exciting it is for us to be partnered with not only you here on the stage, but the folks that are joining us virtually and the folks in this room. We understand that the leaders who are intervening to get broadband in Native communities, clean water through Detroit, solarization in DC, and a just transition for mine workers in New Mexico, and good jobs for Black communities and brown communities and low communities all across this country who have been previously shut out. And so this is an exciting part for us. I want to thank you all for this conversation. I thank you all for joining us both here in the room and virtually, and then these fights for the long haul. We got work to do, but I'm excited to do it with you all. Thank you.